I was 48 when I learned that the 19-year-old boy I had raised, paid for, worried over, argued with, driven to school, taught to shave, and carried out of the emergency room after he broke his wrist at 13 was not biologically mine. And the worst part was that the first man I blamed admitted enough to make me believe I already knew the whole story. His name is Mark, and until last year I would have called him my best friend without needing to think about the word. We met when we were 14, shared a dorm room for one semester, stood beside each other at our weddings, helped each other move houses, buried parents, survived layoffs, and spent enough ordinary weekends together that my son Ethan grew up calling him Uncle Mark, even though there was no blood between us. My wife Laura and I had been married for 23 years. We were not one of those couples who still acted like newlyweds in public, but we had a life that looked stable from the outside and mostly felt stable from the inside, which I now understand is not the same thing as being honest. We owned a house with a mortgage almost paid off, shared a checking account, fought about dishes and money, took one decent vacation every couple of years, and had reached the age where excitement mattered less than knowing who would pick up the prescription on the way home. Ethan was our only child. We tried for almost 3 years before Laura became pregnant, and because the doctors had told us my numbers were low, the pregnancy felt like something we had narrowly earned rather than something that simply happened. I remember standing in our kitchen while Laura held the test with both hands, crying before she even spoke, and I remember dropping to my knees in front of her because my legs stopped working in the happiest way they ever had. That memory became poisonous after the truth came out, not because Ethan stopped being my son in any emotional sense, but because every detail I had treasured suddenly had another person hiding inside it. The discovery itself was not dramatic. Nobody was rushed to a hospital. Nobody found a secret letter in a locked drawer. Ethan bought one of those ancestry kits during his second year of college because his roommate had found a half-sister through one, and he thought it would be funny to see whether our family stories about being mostly Irish were true. I told him he was wasting $90. Laura told him not to put his genetic information online because companies sold everything. He laughed and sent the sample anyway. A month later, he called me from campus and asked whether my cousin Peter had ever taken one of those tests. I said yes, because Peter had spent 2 Christmas dinners explaining our family tree to people who had not asked. Ethan went quiet, then said, Peter did not appear anywhere in his matches. I told him the databases were imperfect, accounts used different names, and maybe Peter had chosen privacy settings. Ethan said he had already messaged Peter, who had opened his profile and confirmed he was visible to relatives. Then Ethan told me he had several strong matches on his mother's side, including Laura's aunt, but nothing on mine beyond distant people with no names I recognized. I felt the first cold movement in my stomach then, but I did what people do when the truth is still small enough to ignore. I explained probabilities. I said the company could have made an error. I said we would talk when he came home. He came home that Friday with the kind of expression adults wear when they are trying not to frighten their parents, which would have been funny in another life, because I was still the person who checked his tire pressure and reminded him to lock his apartment door. We ordered a legal paternity kit from a laboratory in another state, because I wanted something no one could dismiss as an entertainment website. The samples were collected at a clinic where a woman in blue gloves checked our identification, photographed us, sealed the swabs, and asked no questions that mattered. Ethan tried to joke about finally getting proof that my bad knees were not his future, but his voice cracked halfway through. The results arrived 5 days later. The probability that I was his biological father was 0. I read the page 3 times, then opened the attachment on my laptop because the phone screen felt too small for a sentence that large. The report listed excluded genetic markers and explained the conclusion in calm language designed for courts, not families, while Ethan sat across from me at the kitchen table and watched the face of the man he had always called Dad stop belonging to the life both of us understood. I did not blame Ethan. I need that clear. For one horrible second, the room felt unfamiliar because I was looking for my own face in his. but then he asked whether I wanted him to leave, and the fear in his voice put everything back where it belonged. I told him no. I told him he was my son. I told him I did not know what had happened, but none of it was his fault. Then I went into the bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the closed toilet with the test report in my hand until my legs went numb. Laura was at her sister's house that evening, supposedly helping after a minor surgery. I called and asked her to come home without explaining why. She asked whether Ethan was okay. I said he was physically fine and repeated that she needed to come home. She arrived 40 minutes later, walked into the kitchen, saw the report on the table, and stopped so suddenly that the door remained open behind her. That reaction told me the test was not a surprise. I asked one question. I asked who his father was. Laura started crying before she answered, and for several minutes she spoke in fragments about how young we had been, how badly we wanted a baby, how difficult that year had been, and how she had carried the secret so long that sometimes she almost believed the version we lived. I kept asking for a name until she finally said Mark. The sound in my head after that was not anger at first. It was recognition, because once she said his name, 20 years of ordinary moments rearranged themselves with disgusting efficiency. Mark had been around constantly during the year Ethan was conceived. He helped me renovate the spare room. He drove Laura to one prenatal appointment when I was out of town. He cried at the hospital after Ethan was born. He gave Ethan his first baseball glove, paid for part of his school trip to Washington, and never had children of his own. I asked how many times. Laura said once after a neighborhood party when I had left early because I had a morning shift. She said she had been drinking. Mark had been drinking, and both of them regretted it immediately. She said the timing fit, but she did not know for certain until Ethan was born and looked like Mark's baby pictures, which I had never seen. I asked whether Mark knew. She said yes. That answer hurt more than the affair because a single drunken betrayal can be described as an event, but letting another man spend 19 years raising the child you believe is yours requires a decision every morning. Ethan had been upstairs, but he heard enough to understand the name. He came down looking pale and asked whether Mark knew about him. Laura reached for him, and he moved away so fast the chair behind him tipped over. I called Mark from the kitchen with Laura and Ethan listening. He answered on the second ring and sounded normal until I said the DNA test excluded me. There was a silence that felt practiced. I asked whether he had slept with Laura around the time Ethan was conceived. Mark said yes. I asked whether he believed Ethan was his. He said Laura had told him it was possible, then later told him the dates made it likely. I asked why he let me raise his son while sitting at my table, drinking my beer, attending birthdays, and accepting the name Uncle. Mark started saying my name in that soft voice people use when they want forgiveness before they have finished confessing. He said he was ashamed, Laura was terrified, and both of them believed telling me would destroy the marriage and leave Ethan without a stable home. He said he stayed close because it was the only way to know Ethan, which was such a selfish sentence that I had to put the phone on the table before I threw it. Then Mark said something I did not understand at the time. He said he had never been completely sure. I asked what that meant. He said Laura told him there had been no one else, but he always wondered because Ethan did not resemble him as much as she claimed. He said he offered to test privately years earlier, and Laura refused because a result could create records. Laura shouted that he was lying to protect himself. Mark shouted back through the speaker that she had made every decision, and he had spent 19 years doing what she demanded. Ethan walked outside in the middle of it. I saw him through the window, standing in the yard with both hands on his head, while 3 adults who claimed to love him argued over who had lied most efficiently. Mark came to the house the next morning because he believed arriving in person would show courage. I met him on the driveway and told him he was not entering. He looked older than he had the week before. He said he would accept whatever I wanted to say, which made me hate him more because he was still trying to control the shape of my anger by offering himself as a target. I asked whether he had ever given Laura money for Ethan. He said no regular support, but admitted that several large gifts over the years, including part of Ethan's first car and a college account, came from him because he believed a father should contribute somehow. I asked whether he had ever considered telling me. He said every year. I asked whether he had considered it at my wedding anniversary, at my father's funeral, or when I nearly lost the house during a layoff. He started crying and said yes to all of them. I told him we were doing another test, this time between him and Ethan at the same legal laboratory with chain of custody and identification, because if he was Ethan's biological father, then Ethan deserved a fact that did not depend on the people who had lied to him. Mark agreed immediately. I thought that meant he already knew what the result would be. For 5 days I lived inside a strange version of my own house. Laura stayed in the guest room. Ethan slept at a friend's place, but came by during the day. Mark sent messages I did not answer. I went to work because routine was the only thing that prevented me from sitting in the kitchen and staring at the chair where my family had stopped being what I thought it was. Laura tried to explain the affair repeatedly. The details shifted depending on which part made her look less deliberate. First it was one drunken night, then it was 2 encounters within a week because they had already crossed the line. Then she admitted they kissed earlier that summer and exchanged messages for months afterward. She insisted the physical part ended before she knew she was pregnant. I asked to see the old messages. She said they were gone because the phones were gone. I asked whether she had written anything in journals or emails. She said no. I asked whether anyone else knew. She said no one except Mark. Her answers came too quickly. The second result arrived on a Tuesday morning. Ethan asked me to open it because he could not. Mark sat in his car outside the clinic because he did not want to come into the house unless Ethan invited him. The report excluded Mark as the biological father. I laughed once when I read it, not because anything was funny, but because my body had run out of appropriate reactions. Ethan took the page, read the conclusion, and asked Laura who else there had been. She said the test had to be wrong. Mark came inside after Ethan called him, and the 4 of us stood in the living room while Laura insisted laboratories made mistakes. Samples could be contaminated, and chain of custody paperwork did not guarantee anything. I reminded her that she had accepted the first test immediately when it gave her a father she was prepared to name. Mark looked at her with a kind of horror that almost made me feel sorry for him because he had spent 19 years carrying guilt for a child who was not his, while she used that guilt to keep him obedient. He asked again whether there had been anyone else. Laura said no. Then Ethan said he had another close match on the Ancestry site, a woman named Rachel who shared enough DNA to be either a half-sister, aunt, or niece. I knew Rachel. She was my brother Adam's daughter. The room went silent in a completely different way. Adam is 3 years older than me. He had always been the successful one in the family, the first to buy a house, the first to start a business, the person our parents called when they wanted advice, and the person I called when I wanted to feel that somebody had a plan. His daughter Rachel was 27, and she had taken the same ancestry test 2 years earlier while building a family tree for our mother's 70th birthday. If Ethan and Rachel were half-siblings, then Adam was Ethan's father. If Ethan and Rachel were aunt and nephew, the numbers would overlap, but the ages and family structure made that impossible unless another secret existed even worse than the one already in front of us. Laura sat down without anyone asking her to, and the color left her face so completely that the question no longer needed a laboratory. Mark said Adam's name first. Laura covered her mouth. Ethan walked out again, but this time I did not follow, because I could not feel my legs. The affair with Mark had been real. That was the filthy brilliance of the lie. Laura had not invented an innocent man and accused him. She had chosen a guilty man who could not defend himself without exposing his own betrayal, then let both of us believe his guilt explained everything. Adam had been at our house even more than Mark during the year Ethan was conceived. He had helped me get a better position at work, loaned us money during fertility treatments, and spent several weekends repairing the kitchen because he had construction experience. He had also been married to my sister-in-law, Michelle, for 12 years at the time and had a 7-year-old daughter. I asked Laura how long. This time she did not begin with tears. She looked exhausted, as if the final secret had become too heavy to perform around. She said the relationship with Adam began months before the night with Mark and continued for almost 8 years. 8 years. That number changed the betrayal from a period of weakness into a second marriage hidden inside mine. Laura said Adam had comforted her during fertility appointments because I coped by working more and talking less. He listened when she said she felt defective. He told her she deserved to feel wanted. The first time happened at his office after a medical appointment, then again in our house while I worked overnight, then at hotels, family gatherings, and the lake cabin our parents owned. The night with Mark happened during one of several breaks with Adam, when Laura believed Adam would never leave Michelle and wanted to prove she could end the hold he had over her. Mark was lonely, drunk, and available. After the pregnancy, the dates overlapped closely enough that she could not be certain which man was the father. Adam pushed her to name Mark if the truth ever surfaced, because Mark had no wife, no children, no business tied to our family, and no position inside the inheritance our parents planned to divide between us. Mark was guilty enough to accept blame and isolated enough to absorb the damage. That was the dirty secret Laura had protected. She had not simply hidden a biological father. She had protected my brother, his marriage, his reputation, and the financial arrangement that kept all of us connected. I asked whether Adam knew Ethan might be his. Laura said yes. I asked whether he knew Mark believed the same thing. She said yes. I asked whether he had ever asked for a test. She said he had insisted on one when Ethan was 3 months old, but not through a legal lab. Adam had known for 19 years. The test had been done through a private clinic owned by one of his business clients, using samples Laura collected at home. She claimed the results showed a high probability Adam was the father. She had never seen the original report because Adam showed her a copy, then destroyed it after she read it. I asked why she stayed with me. She said she loved me. I told her not to use that word unless she could explain what it meant. She said Adam never intended to leave Michelle, while I was kind, stable, and already loved the baby before he was born. She said she convinced herself biology mattered less than the home I provided, which was a generous way of saying my usefulness made the lie easier to maintain. Ethan returned 20 minutes later and asked whether Adam knew. Laura said yes. He asked whether Adam ever held him knowing he was his son. Laura said yes. He asked whether Rachel knew. Laura said no. Then Ethan asked whether everyone in his life had been assigned a role except him. Nobody answered. I called Adam. He did not answer the first 3 times. On the 4th, he picked up and said he was in a meeting. I told him Ethan's DNA matched Rachel closely enough to suggest they were half-siblings, and the meeting ended immediately. Adam drove to my house that evening. Michelle came with him because he had tried to leave without explaining where he was going, and after 27 years of marriage, she had learned that sudden secrecy usually had a reason. I had not planned a family confrontation. I had planned to speak to my brother alone, but there was no longer a version of the truth that belonged to any one person. When Michelle saw Laura, Mark, Ethan, and me in the same room, she asked whether someone had died. Adam said her name and started crying. Michelle did not. She listened while I explained the tests, Rachel's match, Laura's confession, and the private result Adam had hidden. Her face barely changed until I mentioned the affair lasted 8 years. Then she asked Adam whether he had been with Laura during the summer Michelle miscarried their second child. Adam looked at the floor. That was his answer. Michelle slapped him once hard enough to turn his face, then apologized to Ethan because he had not caused any of it. She took her keys and left. Adam tried to follow, but Ethan blocked the doorway and asked whether he was his father. Adam said yes. Ethan asked why he let another man raise him. Adam said because I was already his father in every way that mattered, and because exposing the truth would have destroyed multiple families. Ethan said those families had still been destroyed, except the liars got 19 extra years first. We arranged a legal test between Adam and Ethan the next morning. Adam did not resist. He knew the result before the samples were collected. The probability that Adam was Ethan's biological father was greater than 99.99%. Facts are supposed to create clarity, but that result only gave the damage a legal name. For the first month, I moved through decisions without understanding what I felt. Laura stayed with her sister. I hired a divorce attorney, froze our joint credit cards, copied tax returns, and changed passwords. Ethan moved back to campus early because every room in the house held a memory he no longer trusted. Mark disappeared from my daily life after sending one final message saying he knew he had no right to ask forgiveness, but wanted me to understand that he had believed he was protecting Ethan. I did not answer because every liar in the story had described silence as protection. Adam's marriage collapsed quickly. Michelle filed for divorce, moved into an apartment, and told Rachel the truth before someone else could turn it into gossip. Rachel called Ethan, and what began as an impossible conversation became the first honest relationship created by the Tess. They were half-siblings. They had grown up as cousins. Neither knew what name to use for the connection, so they used both. Laura's sister tried to convince me that 23 years of marriage should not be erased by something that happened long ago. I told her the affair did not happen long ago to me. I learned it on a Tuesday. The fact that Laura had rehearsed the lie for 19 years did not make my injury 19 years old. The financial side became uglier after my attorney began reviewing records. Adam had transferred money into an investment account for Ethan when he was born, then disguised later contributions as gifts from our parents, reimbursements, and business bonuses to me. He paid part of Ethan's private school tuition through a charitable foundation his company controlled. He had been financially supporting his son while making the support look like family generosity. I had thanked him for those gifts. I found emails between Adam and Laura going back 15 years, not because they preserved romantic messages, but because practical secrecy requires administration. They discussed travel dates, family gatherings, medical appointments, and how to keep Mark anxious enough that he would not ask questions. One message from Laura said Mark's guilt was useful because he never challenged the story when he believed he had caused it. That sentence ended any remaining idea that she had simply panicked. The affair with Adam ended when Ethan was 8, but the alliance continued. They met privately several times a year to discuss school, health, money, and whether I suspected anything. Laura told him about our arguments. Adam advised her when to calm me, when to encourage work travel, and when to let Mark spend time with Ethan, so the wrong explanation remained visible if anyone ever looked too closely. My best friend was not the father, but he had still been used as camouflage for my brother. I confronted Mark with the emails because I wanted to know whether he understood how completely they had used him. He read the message about his guilt, sat at my kitchen table, and covered his face with both hands. He admitted that Laura sometimes encouraged him to take Ethan fishing or attend games when Adam could not, and he had interpreted that as the closest thing to fatherhood he was allowed. I asked whether he ever wondered why Adam was always present too. Mark said he thought Adam was supporting me because I worked long hours. He said guilt made him stupid. I told him guilt did not make him sleep with my wife. He agreed. That was the first answer from any of them that did not contain an excuse. Ethan started therapy through his university and eventually asked me to attend a session with him. He said he did not know whether calling me dad was supposed to reassure me or trap him inside a role he had not chosen. I told him he could call me whatever felt honest, but I would remain his father unless he asked me to leave. He said he was angry at me too, not for the DNA, but because I had spent years dismissing his questions about why Adam treated him differently and why Mark cared so much. He remembered asking at 12 whether Mark could be his real father because another kid joked about it, and I had laughed, then told him families did not need to look alike. He said my confidence had made him doubt his own instincts. That hurt because it was fair. I had noticed differences and translated them into trust. I had seen Laura and Adam understand each other too quickly and called it family closeness. I had watched Mark overreact to Ethan's injuries and called it loyalty. The liars created the deception, but I had protected it by treating suspicion as disrespect. The divorce took 11 months. Laura wanted mediation and asked to keep the house, saying Ethan needed one familiar place. Ethan told both lawyers he would never sleep there again. We sold it. Dividing property felt obscene because every item carried evidence of the life I thought we shared, but the law does not compensate a spouse for being made into an unwitting father. The court could divide retirement accounts, equity, and debt. It could not divide 19 years of hidden parenthood. Laura received less than she expected because the money Adam had transferred to accounts connected to her became part of the financial disclosure, while several expenses she called family support were traced to trips and private meetings. There was no criminal case because the money came from Adam, and the deception was personal rather than a theft from me, but the records destroyed the version of events she wanted to present in mediation. Adam settled his divorce privately. Michelle kept their house and received a large portion of his business interest. Rachel stopped speaking to him for 6 months. When she resumed, it was with rules that made him complain until she reminded him that rules were what honest relationships used instead of secrets. What those legal summaries leave out is that the people Laura and Adam had lied to stopped dealing with them separately because once Ethan, Michelle, Rachel, Mark, and I compared their messages, transfers, and excuses in the same room, we saw that their real power came from keeping each injured person inside separate versions of the story. We met at Michelle's attorney's office with all 5 present and built one timeline from Mark's old messages, Adam's disguised payments, Laura's emails, the private test, and travel dates uncovered in both divorces, then invited Laura and Adam to what they believed would be a quiet family mediation meant to keep Ethan's paternity private. They arrived separately and expected to negotiate with frightened people one at a time, but found all 5 of us sitting together with lawyers, evidence, and no interest in protecting the story that had protected them. Mark signed a statement admitting the affair and explaining how Laura kept him uncertain so he would remain the obvious suspect. Michelle demanded a full accounting of the money Adam hid through his company and foundation, and my attorney confirmed that Ethan's inheritance would remain in an independent trust that neither Laura nor Adam could touch. Ethan and Rachel then told them that biology gave Adam medical relevance, but no automatic right to be called a father, and that neither child would accept private meetings until both adults gave a complete written account without blaming fear, love, or protection. The final step was not a public spectacle because strangers were not needed, but a factual packet sent to relatives, attorneys, trustees, and company officers who had heard different explanations. Adam had to reimburse the questionable foundation payments and step away from its oversight during review. Laura lost the sympathy she expected in mediation, and both discovered that the people they had divided were now comparing every sentence before answering. The revenge worked because it was legal, documented, and almost boring, yet it removed the one thing they had depended on most, the ability to isolate each victim and decide what truth that person was allowed to know. Ethan did not immediately build a relationship with Adam. He met him in public places, asked questions, and left whenever Adam began explaining why the lie had supposedly protected him. He wanted medical history, family information, and facts. He did not want another father auditioning for the role after avoiding it for 19 years. I struggled with that more than I expected. I believed Ethan had the right to know Adam, but every time they met, some animal part of me felt replaced, even though I knew fatherhood was not a chair with one seat. I hated Adam for wanting pieces of Ethan, now that the difficult years were already paid for. Adam had not stayed awake through fevers, attended parent conferences, taught him to drive, signed loan papers, or sat outside the principal's office after a fight. He had watched from the clean side of the glass and called secrecy sacrifice. Then I had to admit Mark had done something similar, except Mark believed the child might be his and accepted whatever scraps Laura offered because shame kept him from demanding more. His betrayal was real, but so was the punishment Laura and Adam quietly assigned him. The public part began when someone from Michelle's family posted a vague message about betrayal, secret children, and twins raised as cousins. We do not have twins, but gossip improves stories by making them less accurate. Within a week, people at work knew enough to avoid eye contact with me and asked too carefully whether Ethan was doing okay. I stopped correcting anyone. The truth was already too complicated for casual conversation. Laura lost several friends because they realized she had allowed them to comfort her through marital problems while keeping the cause of those problems hidden. Others stayed and told her she had made terrible choices while young, which ignored the annual choices required to renew the lie. She wrote Ethan a long letter describing the pregnancy, her fear, and the moment she decided I would be the better father. Ethan returned it with one sentence written on the envelope. "You did not choose the better father for me. You chose the safer liar for yourself." He showed me before sending it. I asked whether he wanted to soften the sentence. He said no. For the first time, I did not ask him to protect an adult from the consequences of the truth. Mark and I did not become friends again, although we met twice because 40 years of history does not disappear simply because trust does. The first meeting was about practical things. He had photographs, school programs, and videos of Ethan that I wanted copied because some were the only records of certain years. The second happened after Mark's mother died, and I attended the funeral because she had treated me like family before any of this existed. Mark thanked me for coming. I told him I came for her. He said he understood. There was no dramatic forgiveness. There was only recognition that a person can betray you and still contain memories you do not know how to discard. Adam tried harder to repair things with me than I expected, partly because our parents were alive and refused to pretend the family could continue normally. My mother cried when she learned the truth and asked why both her sons had lost Ethan at the same time, which was unfair to me but honest about her grief. My father stopped speaking to Adam for nearly a year. At one family meeting, Adam said he was willing to give Ethan a portion of his estate immediately as recognition of the years he had failed him. Ethan asked whether Adam believed money could become retroactive parenting. Adam said no. Ethan accepted the money anyway and placed it into an account for graduate school, explaining later that refusing it would not improve anyone's character. I respected that. What I did not respect was Adam's repeated claim that he had trusted me to raise Ethan well. He used it like a compliment, but it was really another way of describing how useful I had been. I told him that trusting me would have meant giving me the truth and allowing me to choose. What he did was exploit my reliability. That sentence finally stopped him. Laura and I spoke only through lawyers for months, then began occasional conversations because Ethan refused to carry messages between us. She asked whether I hated her. I said some days. She asked whether I still loved her. I said some days, which hurt both of us because it was also true. Love did not vanish when the facts changed. It lost authority. She moved into a condominium near her sister and returned to work full-time. She started therapy and eventually stopped describing the affair as something that happened to her. She admitted that after the first year, fear was no longer the main reason she stayed silent. The lie gave her a stable marriage, emotional access to Adam, control over Mark, and a son raised by the man she trusted most. She had built a system that served her, then called maintaining it sacrifice. Ethan graduated the following spring. The ceremony created a problem because he wanted me there, wanted Laura there, and was not sure whether to invite Adam or Mark. I told him the day belonged to him, and I would sit wherever he placed me. Laura said the same. Adam said he understood if he was excluded. Mark did not ask. Did. Ethan invited Adam, but not Mark. He seated Adam with Rachel and Michelle, not with us. I sat beside Laura for the first time since the divorce process began. We did not speak beyond practical comments, but when Ethan crossed the stage, she reached for my hand out of habit. I let her hold it for 3 seconds, then moved my hand back to my lap. After the ceremony, Ethan took photographs with each group separately. One with me, one with Laura, one with Adam and Rachel, one with Michelle, who had remained part of his life despite owing him nothing. No photograph contained the whole family because the whole family no longer fit inside one honest frame. Ethan later told me that the hardest part was not learning I was not his biological father. It was learning that so many adults had known different pieces while he knew none. Mark knew the affair. Adam knew the paternity. Laura knew everything. I knew nothing but supplied the structure that allowed all of them to pretend, too. He said he sometimes felt like the product of a committee that never invited him to the meeting. I did not know how to answer, so I listened. That has become the main thing I do differently now. The last major truth came from Michelle, who found an old storage box while preparing to sell the house. Inside was a small envelope containing a photocopy of the private paternity report Adam claimed he had destroyed. The clinic name, date, and probability were visible. Adam had kept it for 19 years. The report confirmed he was Ethan's father. Tucked behind it was a handwritten note from Laura thanking Adam for helping her keep their son safe, and saying that someday Ethan might understand why the three of them had chosen stability. The three of them. Not me. Not the man waking for feedings, paying bills, and believing the child in the next room existed inside the same marriage he did. In their private language, I was not part of the choice. I was the stability being chosen. Michelle gave the documents to Ethan, who gave me copies. I expected them to reopen the anger, but what I felt was something quieter and more final. The proof did not tell me anything new. It simply removed the last space where Laura or Adam could claim memory had softened the past. I asked Laura about the note. She said at the time she believed secrecy was the only way to protect everyone. I asked whether she included me in everyone. She cried and said yes. I told her protection without consent is control. She did not argue. I am 49 now. Ethan is 20. He still calls me Dad. He also calls Adam by his first name, though once he accidentally said Dad while asking a question and looked horrified. I told him a word was not a property line and he did not need to apologize. I meant it almost completely. That is the honest version. Almost. Ethan and I remained close, but our relationship changed because truth changes even the bonds it does not break. He asked more direct questions. I admit when I do not know. I no longer tell him family loyalty requires silence. If something feels wrong, we talk about it before trust turns the discomfort into shame. Laura and I are divorced. We can sit at the same table for Ethan, but I do not think we will ever be friends. Too much of her tenderness now arrives with a shadow behind it. Sometimes she tells a story from Ethan's childhood, and I remember she was living two versions of that day. Mark lives across town. I see his truck occasionally and feel a mix of grief and disgust that has become less sharp, but not less true. He was not Ethan's father, yet he still slept with my wife, accepted years of false guilt, and watched me raise a child while believing the child might be his. The second DNA test cleared his blood, not his choices. Adam is still my brother biologically. We speak at family events and about our parents' health. We do not spend time alone. He wants forgiveness because he thinks remorse should eventually earn access. I told him remorse can change what he becomes without changing what I owe him. Rachel and Ethan have built the healthiest relationship in the story, maybe because neither of them began with a lie. They call each other siblings now, sometimes cousins when explaining the situation feels exhausting. They joke that their family tree needs warning labels. I am glad they have each other, even though their closeness sometimes reminds me what Adam took. People ask whether the DNA test ruined my family. It did not. The test described the ruin accurately. The family had been living inside decisions made before Ethan was born, with every birthday, holiday, school play, illness, and ordinary dinner placed on top of a foundation that 3 people knew was false. The test did not create the cracks. They turned on the lights. I have spent months thinking about whether biology should matter as much as it does. I know I raised Ethan. I know love is built through time, not chromosomes. I know Adam cannot become the father I was by producing a laboratory result. Still, learning that my wife conceived a child with my brother changed something physical in me. Because betrayal inside a family is not only about sex. It is about lineage, memory, and the feeling that people used your own name to hide what they did. My best friend slept with my wife and let me believe he had fathered the son I raised, which was already enough to destroy 40 years of trust. Then the test proved he was not the father, and the man behind the secret turned out to be my brother, who had known the truth, funded parts of my son's life, and stood beside me while I thanked him for his generosity. Laura hid one betrayal behind another because the first guilty man made the perfect shield for the second. I used to believe the worst thing someone could steal was your money, your partner, or your time. But the thing they stole from me was informed memory, because I can remember Ethan's birth, his first steps, his first day of school, and every moment after. Yet I now know other people were standing near those memories with information that would have changed how I understood my own life. I cannot go back and consent to the past. What I can do is refuse to let their lies decide the future. Ethan is my son because we choose that relationship now with the facts visible, not because Laura, Adam, or Mark arranged it for us. That difference matters. I thought the DNA test would tell me who Ethan's father was. Instead, it showed me the difference between creating a child, raising one, claiming one, and using one to protect adults from consequences. There were 3 men in the story, and all of us had failed in different ways, but only one of us had been there every morning without knowing he was part of a lie. I am still angry, and I suspect some part of me always will be, but anger no longer owns every room I enter. I have a smaller house, fewer people I call family, and a son who knows exactly where he comes from and still chooses to come home to me. For now, that is enough.